You weren't a soldier, just a lonely old man with stories. That's what the nurse muttered under her breath as she yanked the privacy curtain shut around room 107B, annoyed at having to change the linens again. He thinks he's still on a battlefield, she'd scoffed to the night staff, glancing at the worn-out man with knotted fingers and a wool cap he never took off. Harold Whitmore didn't argue. He never did. He just sat silently by the window in that tired old retirement home, one hand resting on his cane, the other gripping a yellowed envelope with handwriting so neat it looked printed. Above his bed hung a dusty shadow box, nailed shut years ago. Most thought it was just some personal trinket, maybe pictures of a long-gone wife, or medals he bought online. No one ever asked. Until the day he didn't wake up. That morning, a nurse, new, and too young to know how the world works, opened the box while gathering his things. She screamed. Inside were 3 pristine medals, a Distinguished Service Cross, a French Croix de Guerre, and a Medal of Honor. Beneath them, a folded letter signed in fountain pen ink, to Sergeant Harold Whitmore, for valor beyond measure. General George S. Patton. And suddenly, everyone who had mocked the old man with the limp and the mumbling fell quiet. If you believe dignity doesn't expire with age, and that some heroes are only recognized when it's too late, then like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear will stick with you longer than medals ever could. I met Mr. Whitmore 2 months before that box was opened, and the only reason I noticed him was because no one else did. I was the new part-time activity assistant, 19, broke, and clueless. My first shift, I found him sitting by the community garden, tapping his cane in 3 slow beats, pause, then 1 sharp tap. I thought he was just bored. "You okay, Mr. Whitmore?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just gave me a nod that felt more like a permission slip to move on. But I didn't. I kept watching him in small moments. How he lined up the sugar packets at lunch like a formation. How he stood, not sat, when taps played from the hallway TV every night at 9. He never complained, never asked for anything but black coffee. And always that same seat, under the faded flag outside the south window. The others saw a frail, bitter man who talked to himself in riddles. I started to see something else. One day, someone had taken his cane and replaced it with a joke walker wrapped in toilet paper. I found him in the hallway, gripping the wall. "I trained men to rappel out of C-47s with broken ankles," he muttered to no one. "I can walk 30 feet with pride missing." I helped him back to his room, and as I left, he looked at me, not past me, at me for the first time. "You ever watch the trees when the wind stops?" he asked. I said no. They still move. Not because of the wind, but because they remember what it feels like. I didn't understand at the time. Not until later. Not until that last week when the administrator posted eviction notices for several low-income residents, Harold included. Said their Medicare paperwork had lapsed. No one fought for him. You won't even notice, someone laughed. "He talks to birds, for God's sake." But he noticed. Of course he did. The day before he was set to be moved, I brought him a small thermos of real coffee, not the cafeteria stuff. He nodded, took it with a trembling hand, and looked out the window. "Do you know what silence costs?" he asked. I didn't know how to answer. "More than a bullet," he said. "It cost memory." I didn't see him the next morning. They said he was found in his bed, eyes closed, his hand resting on a small sealed envelope that hadn't been there the night before. Inside were 3 names. 3 soldiers. His unit. All listed as killed in 1945. That's when the box was finally opened. That's when the shadow became a story. Turns out Harold Whitmore had been captured during the Battle of the Bulge, escaped to German POW camp, and led 11 wounded soldiers through 17 miles of snow-covered forest without food, while injured himself. Never told a soul. Never put it on his paperwork. He refused benefits. Said, "Leave them for the ones still fighting." The general's letter? Hand-signed. Verified. His medals? Archived, authenticated, and never once displayed. He didn't wear them, because he didn't need to. "A uniform isn't what makes a soldier," he once told me. "It's what he refuses to forget after it's gone." After the discovery, everything changed. The home was audited. The director was removed. But more than that, Harold got remembered. His funeral was standing room only. VFW riders lined the street. The mayor read his letter aloud. But it wasn't the speeches that got to me, it was the fact that his casket passed under the flag outside the south window, and every single staff member, even the ones who laughed at him, saluted. I stood there thinking about those sugar packets, that tapping code, the way he'd memorized the wind. And I realized, he wasn't trying to be noticed. He was training someone to see. Someone like me. So no, Harold Whitmore didn't pass away in silence. He passed the torch, and I promise I won't let it go out. They say when a soldier dies, you bury the uniform, but you keep the silence alive. And that silence was louder than ever the day we cleaned out Harold Whitmore's room. Most of the staff didn't bother. They boxed up his clothes like they were just thread and dust, tossed out his coffee-stained thermos without a second thought. But something told me to stay behind. I don't know what I was looking for. Closure, maybe. But what I found was folded between two pairs of wool socks at the bottom of his drawer. A second envelope, this one sealed in wax and marked with a crest I didn't recognize. I didn't open it right away. My hands were shaking too much. I just stared at it, resting on my lap like it was breathing. I took it to Miss Jenner, one of the few nurses who had ever been kind to Harold. She peeled it open carefully, and inside we found 4 pages, each one handwritten in near-perfect script. It wasn't a diary. It was a report. Submitted voluntarily, April 1969. Account of escape and recovery operation from Stalag 9B, January 1945. It detailed, in chilling clarity, how Harold, then just 17, was captured during the Battle of the Bulge, tortured, starved, and beaten. But instead of breaking, he memorized guard patrols. He learned their names, their rotations, even what they smoked. When a blizzard hit, he faked illness, waited until the searchlight towers were blind, and crawled out through the latrine trench dragging 2 wounded soldiers with him. For 11 nights, he moved through forest with no compass and 1 good boot. He used birch sap to seal a leg wound. He kept the others alive by cutting strips off his own jacket to make fire starters. He even fashioned a sling out of frozen branches to carry the 3rd man when both legs gave out. The last paragraph just read, "I never told command. They called us missing. But we weren't. We were surviving. And that's not something they hand out medals for." But apparently, they had tried. A document was stapled to the back. A commendation for the Congressional Medal of Honor, declined. Hand-signed by General George Patton and 2 other generals I didn't recognize. Below it, scrawled in blue ink, were 5 words. Still others needed it more. The man didn't just walk away from a war. He walked away from the credit. I looked around his room like I was seeing it for the first time. It came by the bed, custom-made. It had an old carving near the handle. 12 core. The tapping code? Morse. The sugar packets? Alphabetized to spell out the last names of his unit. Every habit he had was part of a pattern, remembrance disguised as routine. I felt sick. Not because of what he did, but because we almost buried it under bingo cards and paperwork. That night, I uploaded the full letter to a private military history forum, just hoping someone could confirm what I was seeing. Within hours, it exploded. A retired colonel messaged me directly. "Is this real? This is Whitmore. The ghost." I didn't know what he meant until he sent back an old black and white photo, creased in the corners. A dozen men in snow-soaked fatigues, standing in front of a smoldering barn. In the center, a teenager barely old enough to shave, Harold, standing with a rifle across his chest and a soldier slumped over each shoulder. The caption read, "Rescued by Ghost. Germany, 1945. I couldn't believe it, but others could. The next morning, a van pulled up to the retirement home. Not a coroner van, not hospice, military transport. 2 Marines stepped out in dressed blues, asked for his room, and requested to see the shadow box. Then came a second car, then another. By noon, the entire lobby was full of uniformed veterans, local VFW officers, even a man from the Pentagon Historical Records Office, holding a scanned version of the same commendation I'd found in the drawer. They stood in silence around his things, removing their hats, eyes forward. A salute was called, not because it was procedure, but because it was personal. The administrator tried to play it off. "We honor our residents," she said. But when someone showed her the eviction notice she'd signed 3 days before his death, she quietly stepped back and left the room. No one clapped. No one filmed. But something shifted. That night, a candlelight vigil formed on the lawn. Not organized. Not publicized. Just dozens of people, some who didn't even know his name, standing outside under that flag by the south window. The one he always sat beneath. I stood with them, holding the printout of his report in one hand and the shadow box in the other. I thought about the last thing he ever said to me. "Do you know what silence costs?" I do now. It costs recognition. It costs legacy. But we were done being silent. A local reporter picked up the story the next day, and within a week, it had reached national syndicates. They called him the quiet hero of room 107B. Tributes poured in. From Paris. From Brussels. Even from a German family whose grandfather was among those liberated during the same operation. They said, he wasn't just a ghost. He was our salvation. And here's the part that wrecked me. His will, short and tight, left one request. Do not embalm. Do not dress. Lay me down in my field uniform. And let them see who I always was. We honored it. And I swear, as the honor guard placed the folded flag into my hands to give to the only next of kin they could find, some estranged niece in Oregon, I could still feel the weight of that envelope in my pocket. The silence was over. His memory would speak now. Loud, clear, and unforgettable. They said it would be a quiet burial, a few words, a flag, a final nod to a man no one really knew. That was the plan. But quiet doesn't last when truth gets loose. By the time we arrived at the cemetery, cars were already lining the road for a quarter mile. It started with just the VFW riders, maybe a dozen or so in leather vests with flags fluttering behind their bikes, idling in the mist. Then came the local National Guard, then a detachment from the 101st, every one of them requesting permission to attend. Then came a convoy from Fort Bragg. And then, almost like a whisper on the wind, an unmarked black sedan rolled up to the entrance, and a man stepped out with silver stars on each shoulder. General Bright, Chief of Joint Special Operations Command. No cameras, no speech, just a man who had once trained under the very doctrines Harold Whitmore helped shape. He walked straight to the casket, placed his coin beside the folded flag, and saluted like the earth itself needed to stop and pay attention. I stood off to the side, stunned. This wasn't just a service, it was a homecoming. Not for Harold's body, but for his story. One by one, strangers came forward to speak, not from a podium, but kneeling beside the casket like they were reporting in. A man from Belgium placed a small flag on the grass and whispered something in French. A woman in uniform read a telegram her grandfather had written in 1945, thanking the silent boy who pulled me from the fire. Another stood back and played a recording grainy audio of Patton himself dictating a commendation, mentioning Harold by name. It was like watching a myth unfold in reverse. And yet, none of this seemed to matter to the retirement home where he'd been evicted like he was nobody. That same day, as we stood by the grave, a notice was posted online. Rosemead Rest Facility was being shut down, permanently pending federal investigation. Complaints. Negligence. Misuse of veteran benefits. They'd missed their chance. They had housed a national treasure in room 107B and left him to rot. But the world wasn't finished with Harold Whitmore. 2 weeks after the burial, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a copy of that sealed letter I'd found in his drawer, but annotated. Handwritten footnotes confirmed that the rescue route he'd used had been studied by NATO survival instructors. Another note highlighted how his rationing plan under extreme cold exposure had become the foundation of Arctic field manuals. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a model. And yet, he'd never cashed it in. No memoirs. No interviews. No TikToks. Just one room, one cane, one window, and decades of unspoken memory. And the final punch came during a ceremony I wasn't even supposed to attend. The Pentagon invited me, a college kid who once handed out pudding cups, to present his name on a plaque in the Hall of Unacknowledged Heroes, a section deep inside a secure wing normally reserved for eyes with clearance. I didn't have clearance, but they waived it. He'd have wanted someone quiet, the officer told me. Someone who watched. I walked in and saw a wall of names, no photos, no fanfare, just etched brass plates under soft golden light. I found Harold's name between two others I'd never heard of, and I lost it. Not out of sadness, but out of reverence. The kind that hits you when you realize legacy isn't built in noise, it's built in sacrifice no one claps for. And as I touched the plaque, I remembered the last full sentence Harold ever said to me. He looked out at the trees and said, "They still move, and not because of the wind, but because they remember." That line has lived with me ever since. And now I see it everywhere. And how young soldiers carry their packs a little tighter. And how commanders read a little slower when they see an old name resurface. And how even school kids leave letters at his grave, asking questions no textbook can answer. Were you scared? Did it hurt? Why didn't you tell anyone? But I know the answer. Because telling would have meant centering himself. And Harold Whitmore didn't fight for attention. He fought for lives. And when the fight was over, he kept walking quietly. just like the wind. So no, Harold isn't gone. He's just finally been seen. Every year now, on the anniversary of his death, a single white rose is laid outside what used to be room 107B. No card, no name, just a rose. Some say it's left by a member of his old unit who somehow survived. Others say it's a soldier passing through, paying tribute to the man who rewrote survival. I don't know, and I don't want to know. Some stories are strongest when we don't chase them. We just carry them forward. So the next time you pass a quiet old man in line at the pharmacy or see someone tapping their cane to a rhythm no one else hears, don't roll your eyes. Don't sigh. Stop. Listen. You might be standing in the presence of someone who once carried the weight of the world and chose to carry it quietly. Like Harold did. Not for medals. Not for applause. But because it was his post. And like he told me once, you protect what's in front of you, even when no one's looking.